All right, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go and create a new substance. Let's just make sure that it's PBR metallic. Now, we're not going to need any of these yet, so we'll just delete it so it doesn't clutter up our workspace. Now, we'll eventually go in there and add a base material so we can view our output, but we're only going to be dealing with emissive in this tutorial, so it's not really going to matter so much. The first thing we're going to be doing here is building our segment shape. Now, since this is procedural, we're going to have a lot of opportunity to adjust it and size it and try to figure out how we can get it exactly how we want it. So what I'm doing now is just trying to get it just the right size so we can build this digit and have it fit in our square here. Now, I'm going to try to build the end caps. So we'll go with that. And now let's turn this 45 degrees. Now, let's blend these together. And let's see. Don't forget to set the blending mode to add. And now you can see the edges, the corners are poking out a little bit. So we're going to activate our end cap and scale it down just a tiny bit until we can't see the corners poking out anymore. That looks good. All right. Let's just transform this. Now we're just going to offset it a little bit to the left and try to get it just right. There we go. Now, I guess we could mirror the top one, but I like to have more control over the positioning. Just later when we have to tweak to get it just right, it's better to have this as a separate transformation node. And just so we can see our output here, we're going to blend it in with the previous result. And don't forget to set add as your blending mode. I guarantee you'll forget at least once and be like, what's going on? So if you don't see your transformation in your blend, it's most likely that. Now, here's a little trick that we can get rounded edges on our segment. We're just going to do a high quality grayscale blur and then tighten in the levels. Oops. And we lower the intensity of the grayscale to get more of a defined roundness. And just play with these until you get it to just how you want it. It's really going to matter. This is where like the artistic part comes in. I mean, you could make this look any way you want, but that looks fine. And now we're just going to frame this, and we will call it segment shape. And there we go. We'll use this for our entire digit. All right, before we do anything else, let's jump in here and just save this material. All right, so our next step in this process is going to be taking each of these segments and trying to build a digit. So it's going to involve a lot of transform nodes. So I'm going to take this first transform and move it up. I'm going to make this the topmost digit. And I can already tell that this is going to be a little bit too big. But that's the beauty of this procedural workflow is it's going to be really easy to hop in there and tweak some of these segments just to get it just right. So we got to rotate this. Here we go. And we'll blend these two together. Don't forget to set your blending mode. I'm just going to eyeball this. It's definitely too big. So we're going to select the original center section piece and we're going to scale it down. This part is a bit fiddly. We're going to have to just trust that we're going to get it. Next, we'll move both of these end caps in. Let's see. Just a little. There we go. And notice it's 0.15. So since this is symmetric, we're going to make this one negative 0.15. Beautiful. All right, I think this is gonna do it. Let's just try this again. Perfect. Yep, I think that's gonna work. So let's put in the right side. Let's toss in another transform node. Rotate it. And let's blend this with the previous blend. Set this blending mode to add. And let's move it in place. Let's try to get it perfect. There we go. Add another transform node. And this one we shouldn't have to move. Let's see if it comes out that way. Back to the original shape, and let's shrink it down just a tiny bit. And we're going to move this end cap. Let's just guess. It's going to be... Nope. Let's try another one. 0.13. Right, and now this one will make this negative 0.13. Nice. And let's just go and tweak the transform of each of these segments. There we go. Okay, great. There's nothing particularly special about the next 3 segments, so I think I'm just going to fast forward this for you guys. Nice. All right, here we go. So now we have a digit. We can get into some of the more fun stuff. Each of these digits needs to light up, and it also needs to have an off state, which is not like completely invisible. It's gonna just be dimmer. So let's just making some room here. Since our segment is basically just a grayscale mask, we're gonna need a color ramp. That's just going to convert the white of our mask to some color of our choosing, in this case, red. But sometimes the color is going to be a bright color, and sometimes it's going to be a dark color when the segment is turned off. So we're going to need some way to select between these two color ramps. Let's just go in here and make our off segment color. Just make it a little darker. It should look good. Let's see. Yes. All right, that looks good. So now we have to pick between on or off. We're going to do that using a switch node. So let's add a switch node here. The switch node just takes two inputs and then picks one of them. Eventually we'll write a function for this node, but for now we can just pick one manually. So let's make some room here first. All right, there we go. So we're just going to take this group and duplicate it. If you hold shift while you duplicate, it will actually create the nodes without the connections. Really useful if you didn't know that. And we're just gonna tie this into the blend above and try to keep your graph nice and tidy. And this will be boring, so I'm gonna fast forward this for you guys. Okay, this looks great. So let's come up to our first switch. You can see we have input 1 and 2, true and false. And if we look on the sidebar, under instance parameters, we'll see a value we can toggle on or off, true or false. Great, it works. But there's no code to do anything. We're going to add that next. Actually, no, we're going to add an output node because we want to see what this looks like in our 3D view. We're just going to add an emissive here, which is probably all we'll need. But let's see what this looks like. The emissive. Cool. All right, I mean, that looks good. I'm going to add a base material node as well. This will have all the other outputs, normal map, you know, if we can expose height and everything else, roughness. Maybe we want to show a little bit of glass over it eventually, but we'll just have this base material node here to give us the rest of our outputs. That looks pretty good. Cool. All right. Now that we got this nice looking 8, we're going to start wiring it up so we can tell it which digit we want to show. So back up here, we got this switch that's selecting between two colors depending on if the segment's on or off. So we'll need a function that takes two parameters. One, which is the digit that we want to render, like 0, 1, 2, 3, up to 9. And another, which is the segment index. So the function knows which segment we're talking about. So we're going to add a substance function, right-clicking on this tree over here and going to add a function. And we're going to name it isSegmentOn. And then we need to tell this function about these parameters. So first we're going to add the segment ID parameter. Make sure you pick an integer 1. And we're going to give the label something readable, segment ID. Now if we go back to our main graph, we have to tell our switch that we want it to act on a function. So we're going to expose or create a function, and we're going to drag in our new function that we just created, and then right click and set it as the output node. Now we need to get the segment ID. So right. So first we have to go out and tell the switch that there is a parameter coming in called segment ID. So let's hop back out to our graph. We're going to click on the switch node, and down in the input values section, we're going to add a new input, and we're going to call it segment ID. Make sure we keep that hash in the front, and make sure that we tell it it's an integer 1. Now you can see that we have this little pin, and we can set a constant value. So we're just going to name all the digits in order, like 1, 2, 3. All the segments. The top one is going to be a 1, then the left, right, 2, 3. Then the middle is going to be a 4. The left, right on the bottom is 5, 6, and the bottom is a 7. That's just so we have a way to reference which digit we're talking. I'm sorry, which segment we're talking about. So it's looking, that's, it's acting upon that digit, but we don't have any logic in our switch yet. We just have that function we defined. So just to recap, we have a switch which has a function defined in it, and in that function, we have a custom function called isSegmentOn that is going to contain all the logic that we're going to need. Let's see. Right. Well, now we can come in here and select segment ID as the variable that we're interested in. We still need the digit itself, so we can tell it which one that we want to show. To do that, that is going to be exposed in our main graph. So we're going to go and double click on the background of our graph. I see something. Right. So the integer that I'm passing in here was a float. It should have been an integer. You can tell that the pin node is yellow. They're both yellow matching. The error goes away. So now if you double click on the background, go to the input parameters, let's add an identifier called digit, and the type is going to be an integer 1. We'll just call the label digit so we know what we're talking about. And we're going to set the default value to 0, the minimum value to 0, and the maximum to 9. So now we have a new parameter that we can access from our graph. So if we head back into our custom function isSegmentOn, we need to tell it about this new parameter. Along with our segment ID, now we have a digit. So let's add a digit param, integer 1, label digit, and we're going to add a node variable get integer 1, and from this drop down up here we'll be able to select segment ID and also digit 1. So just duplicate that, have a segment ID, and down here we'll select digit. So here's our two values. These are the only two things we need to tell if all of these segments should be on or off. So we want to first check to see if the segment is 1, which is what we're calling the topmost segment. So if the top segment equals 1, so we're going to need a conditional node. We'll drag that out next. All right, if and else. And now what we want to do if it's the first digit, or I'm sorry, the first segment, is determine when that is on or off. Now, I've done this a bunch of times, so I know that the top is on when the digit is not a 1 and when it's not a 4. So it is kind of annoying trying to figure all of these out, and we want to do the minimum because we could have said if it's on if it is a 0 or a 2 or a 3 or a 5 or a 6 or a 7, but you obviously want to do the inverse, or just whatever one is the least amount of nodes. In this case, we're going to do not equal to 1 and not equal to 4. So we'll build this little conditional tree, and we plug the AND into the middle, which is if it's true. And we are going to set this conditional as the output node by right-clicking on it and setting output. No, we're essentially going to have a huge chain of these, one for each segment that's possible. And we're going to chain together the conditional nodes. And let's just come down and see what happens if we try it out. So if we double click on the background, go to input parameters and click on the eyeball, we'll be able to cycle through our digit parameter that we exposed and watch it not work. Why is it not working? Let's see. We did not pass the digit in. So go into that switch, the switch node, and we made this digit pin. We have to tie it into our top level digit parameter. So we're going to get an integer, and it should be selectable now. There it is, digit, and drag that in. Now it should work. So let's go back to our main graph and double click on the background. Go down, click on the eyeball in the input parameters, and now let's cycle through the digits. It's off for 1 and 4. So just as a sanity check, we'll come back and check after we do each of these digits. But one by one, we'll be getting each one to work. Next, we're going to remove the next switch, which doesn't have any of that good logic in there. And we'll copy the top one and paste it down here. Remember, if you hold shift when you paste, it'll come unconnected like this. All right. And we're going to change this digit to 2. So we're going to essentially be talking about the top left segment. All right. Let's rewire up our gradient map. And now we want to plug the output of this switch into the top of that blend. And we want to keep doing this as we travel down this tree. So since this is super exciting and kind of trivial, I'm just going to fast forward here. All right, Now let's start focusing on the next set of logic on our is segment on custom function. So we're gonna copy this tree here and just move it straight down, and we are gonna start thinking about segment number 2. So let's change this to a 2. 2 is gonna be the top left segment. Now, when is this not on? I figure most of them are not on instead of on. So it's not on for 1. It's not on for 2. It's not on for 3. And it's not on for 7. So there's 4. So since there's 4, we can copy this little subtree here. And just copy the subtree down. One, 2, put a 3. And a 7. And then we're also going to need to add a root ampersand node to connect these two. Now we're going to replace this ampersand with the new ampersand, and we're going to drag the previous conditional's output into the false input of the next conditional. Then we need to right-click on the conditional and set it as the output node. Now let's go back to our main graph and check to make sure it's working. So let's go down to the input parameters section, click on the eyeball, and scrub through this digit param. So let's see. 1, 2, 3 is looking good. 4 is looking good. 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Great. So now you see the process. We're just going to have to do this same thing to the remaining segments. So let's go back to our is segment on function, and we see we got 1 and 2. Now we need to do the last 5. So we're just going to duplicate that last subtree, and we are going to work on the top right segment, which is only off for numbers 5 and 6. So we're going to change the 1 and the 4 to a 5 and a 6. Let's change this. And now we need to connect our previous conditional. Let's see. The output of our previous conditional needs to be in the bottommost input in the next conditional. It's basically saying, if this condition wasn't true, just give me the result of all of the nodes below me. And we'll just set this to the output node. All right, looks good. Now let's copy this subtree, paste it down here, and start working on segment 4. So let's change the 3 to a 4. And we'll connect up the previous conditional. Now, in this case, the center segment is going to be turned off on number 0, 1, and 7. So let's change that to a 0. We'll change the 6 to a 1. And we're going to need another branch. So we can come down here and copy this tiny subtree. And change this to a 7. And we're going to need to add this extra ampersand in here and wire it up. Ugh. Sometimes it's hard to grab these pins. There we go. All right, so let's copy this subtree up here. And start working on segment 5, which is the bottom left segment. Okay, so this segment is on the least amount of times, so we're going to do the opposite here and use equals and or instead of not equals and and it is going to be on for 0 and 2 and 6 and 8. So we'll need 4 of these. We'll just change this to equals, and we'll make sure these are equals. This needs to be an or. Just duplicate this and make this a 6. And we'll make this an 8. And we'll OR the two ORs together. And connect it to the previous conditional. All right, we're getting close. Now we'll do the bottom right segment, which is the 6th segment. Change this to a 6. Now this is going to be the easiest one because it is only off for the number 2. So let's wire up the conditionals here and set this as the output node. All right, and now we're on to our final segment, the bottom segment. Let's go and copy one with a not equals there. All right, now we'll just change this integer to a 7. And this is going to be off for 1, 4, 7, and 9. Let's just set these up, and that should be it. Just wire up the conditionals. Set this as the final output node. And now we can take a look and see if it works. So come over here to the eyeball and your input parameters, and let's scrub through the digits. Yikes. All right. Something is wrong. Let's just keep going through. All right, so 3 is good. It looks like 1 and 2 are bad. We'll find out what we did wrong in a second. 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so I guess it's not so bad because now I could show you how I go about debugging something, which will happen probably 100% of the time. Maybe not 100%. All right, so this is something wrong with the 5th segment. So let's drill down into the 5th segment block and take a look at what we did. All right. So it definitely should not be on when the 1 is on. So let's just get rid of that and wire this back up. All right, so let's take a look and see how it looks. Come on. All right. But it is not on for the 2. All right, so what I should have done was changed the 1 to a 2. That was my problem. Easy enough. Let's just put it back. Sorry for all of you who are following along and did it wrong with me. I'm going to put in a little note so you don't do that. All right, now this will be good. Awesome. Okay, well now there's one more thing left that we want to do to make this a lot more useful. We want to be able to expose a color parameter, so we can set this to be any color we want. But the problem is that our gradient map does not allow us to expose a color, mainly because there's no selector built in that can accommodate this gradient picker. And I was really going to give up on trying to figure out how to do it until I figured this trick out, and I think it's pretty awesome. I'm just going to, I don't know, maybe it's not a trick, maybe a lot of people know it, and I just figured it out, but it works. So we're going to come up here and use a dynamic gradient map. This was my first obvious choice to getting it to work, but it still wasn't that obvious because it only allows you to plug in an image, and it's not quite clear how this could help us in this situation, but bear with me here. We are going to have to rewire our gradient map that we currently have, and let's move these out of the way. And we're going to basically replace them with our dynamic gradient. Let's duplicate that. And we're going to plug our final transform node into the tops of our dynamic gradients and wire in the outputs just like we had before. Now you can see we wire these in, it doesn't just work despite having our gradient selected, which was disappointing because I guess I thought it should have worked, but it didn't. So here's how we're going to get around this issue. First, we're going to plop in a tile generator color node. And we're going to head over here and in the parameters, and we're going to set the X amount to 2 and the Y amount to 1. So now we have this double tile, this brick pattern, and we want to change the pattern to a square. And it looks like we just have one solid square, but they are two white squares next to each other. So let's head down in the properties till we find... What am I looking for? I'll know it when I see it. Looking for the background color. Or, okay, this is it. And let's pick our red. And now we're going to turn on this checker mask to true. And let's drag this in here. And it looks horrible, but that's just because our gradient, our two tiles are reversed. So we're going to come down here to invert mask and click true. And that looks awesome. Now what is cool is this is an exposable color, which is great. So let's see, and we won't even need a dark color because we can just calculate that color dynamically using the single light color input that we're going to create. So let's just do that first. We're going to come down into our project properties to our input parameters, and we're going to add a new input parameter, and we'll call this segment color. And we'll give it a type float 4, and we'll change the slider value to color RGBA. Just give it a label, segment color. Set a default value. And now we have to let this tile generator know that instead of using this color we gave it, it should use the segment color that we just defined, which is right here. So now whenever we change segment color, this node should update. But we're going to need to also define this darker color. So let's create another tile generator node. Just copy it from the above one. And this is going to be slightly different. We also want it to look at the segment color, but we want to perform an operation on that color first before it's fed into its next node. So we're going to head down in the properties to the color, and we can see, since we copied it from the one above, that it already is configured to look at the segment color. Now what we want to do is pull off of this pin, and we want to multiply this float 4 color that we have. And let's see, we're going to use a float 4 constant, and let's just do 0.5 all the way down. And now obviously this can be tweaked, make it darker or lighter or whatever. But now we'll set this multiply to the output node, and you can see that it is automatically darkened. All right, now let's just wire this new node up. And now we have our top segment connected to our dynamic color ramp. So I'm just going to go through and fix all of these. There. Now we can finally play with our color and see what it looks like. Let's come down to our eyeball, and you can see now we have a color picker. So let's see. Ooh, it's nice. So now we have a pretty versatile texture here. In my next tutorial, I'll be showing you guys how to bring this texture into Unreal Engine and create a customizable scoreboard asset with it. It'll be pretty cool. In the meantime, please like and subscribe to support my new channel, which is geared towards everything game development for solo game developers by a solo game developer.